Welcome, everyone, to the second of this year's expanded virtual brown bag sessions. My name is Alex Wiseman, and I have the honor of representing the Texas Tech University Educational Leadership Policy faculty as a professor and the Center for Innovative Research in Change, Leadership, and Education, which we call CIRCLE, as its director. Today, we're going to hear Dr. Jacob Kirksey discuss his work in a talk titled Teacher Turnover and Student Achievement under the Texas Teacher Incentive Allotment. Try to say that 10 times fast. Insights from an urban school district, which will then be followed by a period of question and answer with those of you attending the session. The expanded virtual brown bag series is part of CIRCLE's commitment to developing an environment of innovation, research, learning, and collaboration locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. If you haven't already, please check out and share our website with your colleagues, friends, and students. And the way you can find it is by Googling TTU Expanded. Our website should be the first item in the results list. And then register for as many of our upcoming virtual brown bags as you can. We really want to see you there. Before we transition to Dr. Kirksey today, let me take just a minute to share a little more about our virtual brown bag series. The aim of Expanded is multifaceted. It's intended to be a platform where researchers, policymakers, students, and faculty can come together to delve into the important and current issues that shape our educational landscape. Through this series, our speakers and panelists bridge gaps, they foster dialogue, and they facilitate the cross-pollination of ideas that drive educational innovation and broadly transform educational practice and policy. At CIRCLE, we firmly believe that education and policy are intrinsically linked, and the decisions we make today have the power to shape the future of our society. And by sharing the latest research and cutting-edge practices, Expanded empowers all of us to make informed choices, drive positive change, and inspire the educational leaders of tomorrow. But Expanded isn't just about information, it's also about engagement. So as it is appropriate, we invite everyone participating in each session to participate actively, ask questions, challenge assumptions, and collaborate with us. Your perspectives, your experiences, and your ideas are just as invaluable, and they enrich our collective understanding. I'd like to express our gratitude for your presence here today and your commitment to the advancement of education and policy. We are excited about the journey ahead and the incredible learning opportunities it promises. So without further ado, let's embark on this educational journey together. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Jacob Kirksey. He's an assistant professor in the Educational Leadership Policy program at Texas Tech University and an associate director of CIRCLE. His work stresses a holistic approach to policymaking by drawing attention to knowledge gaps in how changes made in and outside of schools interact with dynamic educational contexts. The goal of Dr. Kirksey's research is to foster data-driven decision-making in local, state, and federal policy to forge win-win public policies that bolster educational and economic outcomes for historically marginalized populations. To evaluate programs and policies, Dr. Kirksey employs quasi-experimental techniques using data sets from school districts, government agencies, and large-scale surveys. He's published extensively on topics related to student absenteeism and truancy, inclusion in special education, the ripple effect, immigration enforcement, and teacher labor markets. Dr. Kirksey has received over $1.4 million in external funding as principal investigator or co-PI to support his research. And his research has been highlighted in several popular media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, Politico, Education Week, the Hechinger Report, and Chalkbeat. Today, Dr. Kirksey is going to be talking to us about the impact of the Texas Teacher Incentive Allotment, or the TIA program, on teacher turnover and student achievement. Passed by the 83rd Texas Legislature in 2019, House Bill 3 introduced one of the largest teacher pay-for-performance systems in the nation, aiming to provide a feasible pathway for effective teachers to earn substantial salaries, particularly in challenging-to-staff schools. While the effectiveness of pay-for-performance initiatives has been debated, Dr. Kirksey's research takes a unique perspective, delving into a small urban school district to investigate the correlation between TIA designation and teacher turnover rates. In addition, Dr. Kirksey's talk explores whether students under TIA designated teachers experienced enhanced academic performance compared to their peers. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kirksey to the virtual podium as we begin our discussion today titled Teacher Turnover and Student Achievement under the Texas Teacher Incentive Allotment, Insights from an Urban School District.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to see all of you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jacob Kirksey. I'm an assistant professor here in the College of Education at Texas Tech University. I'm also the associate director of the center sponsoring this series, CIRCLE, the Center for Innovative Research and Change Leadership in Education. I'm excited to in general, talk to you all about something that has certainly been at the top of my mind this last year, whether that was discussions around the legislative session. Just in general, I like to think a lot about the teacher workforce in Texas, and the teacher incentive allotment is a big part of that. But more broadly, if you're not familiar with some of my work, I'm generally interested in the intersection between education and other areas of public policy. So I have a lot of work that looks at disability policy, inclusion, services for students with individualized education programs, also the workforce, and that includes the teacher workforce, as well as spillover effects of immigration policy. But today, I am squarely focused on a very hot topic in Texas education policy, the Teacher Incentive Allotment Program. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started, but I just want to, in general, encourage you if you have questions. I love conversation elements of this piece. Don't feel like you have to be silent during the presentation. If you have immediate questions, I would love to hear those for you. I have about roughly a half hour, maybe less, depends on how fast I talk, of material to talk about our latest work in evaluating the teacher incentive allotment in a small urban partnering district that we work closely with, and on teacher retention. But in general, I want to encourage us to have conversations about implications of the teacher incentive allotment statewide, national implications for other states looking at similar policies. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Yell if you can't see my screen, but we've been doing this long enough, and I assume I'm proficient enough to be able to accurately share my screen with you all. So what I'm going to talk about today is preliminary findings, but we're pretty happy with the way this has taken shape so far on the effects of the Teacher Incentive Allotment, or TIA, on teacher retention in a partnering school district. I do want to, before continuing, acknowledge my collaborators on this work. While we're kind of spanning into two different policy briefs and papers on the initial effects of TIA, one focused on teacher retention and the other focused on student achievement and broader school improvement. So not all of these co-authors are on this particular paper, but in general, they have been amazing consummate colleagues. So I want to acknowledge Kristen, Angela, and Teresa, Andrew, Nick, Emmy, Mason, and Shruti. So just a little bit of background if you're not super familiar with the teacher incentive allotment. This is a new merit pay policy in Texas. So the Texas teacher incentive allotment was created in 2019 after House Bill 3 passed in the 83rd Texas legislature. TIA has aimed to create a clear path to earning a six-figure salary for effective teachers. This is the main piece of the rhetoric. If you go to the TIA website, in what you listen to the Commissioner of Education talk about, we want teachers to be able to earn six figures if they are consistently effective with their students. The Texas Education Agency requires school districts to initially, when they are adopting their TIA programs, to conform to specific validity requirements. And this basically is just ensuring that TIA teachers are not being overrepresented in certain schools or subject areas. And if you go on the TIA website, you may see that there is a section for Texas Tech. I want to be clear, that is not me. I am purely on the efficacy evaluation piece of TIA. There is a separate team in our College of Education that does these validity checks for the entire state. And so once districts submit their plans and their plans are approved and they do their initial data capture year, they then submit their data and designated teachers to the other Texas Tech team, and they do a little bit of validity checks, and it's essentially just correlational analysis, making sure that TA teachers are represented in different areas, and that also other things that we would expect to be correlated with things like value-added measures are in fact correlated with them, such as t-test observations. So it's a lot of work, and it's a significant amount of infrastructure and effort for districts to do it. But the reason that there's a lot of incentive to do it is because there are significant merit bonuses attached to TIA designation. So the general policy, based on the numbers you're seeing here, this is an allotment that can go to a teacher based on their designation status. And so over there on the far right, master teacher is the highest designated status. If you check all the boxes in terms of your school is rural, you're in a low-income school, you can earn maximum of $32,000 a year for 5 years each year after you've been designated as a bonus. It scales based on a couple of different pieces of the formula, but that is like the most. And that is not necessarily what the teacher earns. I want to be clear about that. The rule is that 90% of that allotment, so that $32,000, or if you're over there on recognized on the lower end, $3,000, the rule is that 90% of that has to be spent on teacher pay at the campus where the designation was earned. So in the district data where I'll be showing you today, I will just say 90% of that allotment does go to the teacher. So just for now, we can look at these numbers and think of them as directly going to teachers in the form of salary lump sum payments the following school year after their designated status. And then one piece of the conversation that I kind of glossed over a little bit is once you've been designated, so let's say you are a recognized teacher, that designation holds for you for the next 5 years. So you receive that allotment for 5 years. And the only reason that would change is if you level up, you go to exemplary or master from recognized. But if you're master, what's interesting is you can't level up. So your designation is good for 5 years until it's up, and then you have another shot to get designated after that. So it's a little complicated. Pablo asked in the chat, what percentage does the designated teacher receive? That is entirely a district decision. So in the district that I'll be showing you data from, 90% of that allotment goes to the teacher in form of salary or bonus pay. But there are some other districts, so I'm thinking of Dallas ISD, other districts, and some of them actually had models that were very much the motivation for TIA. They have a different approach, and they may award some of that allotment to the teacher. So let's say of that $32,000, maybe the teacher gets a $5,000 bonus or a $2,000 bonus. And they'll spend the rest of the money, again, on teacher salaries at the campus where the designation was earned, but maybe they will give the principal, an extra $25,000 as a bonus sign-on for a teacher that they really need in, let's say, like secondary math, and they can offer that money because it's still going to teacher pay at the campus, but not necessarily to the designated teacher. So there's flexibility there, and I really want to get into that conversation perhaps in the Q&A about implications of that. What do we think of that? Because I know initially when I was thinking of this policy, it kind of caught me off guard that money wasn't going to the teacher just given the rhetoric. But yeah, I've since kind of changed my mind a little bit. I'll talk about whether I think it's fair, later on in the discussion. Again, for the data I'll be showing you, in this case, 90% does go to the teacher. And I would, I guess, tweak the question a little bit, Shruti, and I don't necessarily think we can frame it as taking money away from the teacher. It's more of just, in general, how do we orient ourselves around this conversation of having these significant merits as bonuses in education in the first place. But regardless, we've seen rapid expansion. So I talked about this takes a lot of work, and as somebody who has worked closely with the district to, adapt new cohorts and make new teachers eligible for TIA in different subject areas, I can tell you it is a lot of work, but we've seen in the latest snapshot, nearly 50% of Texas districts are fully approved for TIA. And you can see over there in that kind of aqua color, that a lot of these are rural districts. And that is, I think, particularly important given that what I said about how much capacity it takes to build a TIA system for a district. And so rural districts, we can think about many times having less resources, particularly at the central office level, to adopt systems like this. So you need people who understand data, you need people who understand how to collect data, design systems, and so on and so forth. So this, in terms of a policy perspective, is good news in terms of the expansion of TIA and what we're seeing statewide. But I will say anecdotally, we are still hearing, on the ground, a number of districts very reticent to adopt TIA for a couple of reasons. One, worried that the policy might go away. And so they've kind of invested a lot of time and energy doing something that, isn't long lasting, but also, again, thinking it's not really worth it. So, we have to hire more district staff or hire, to actually adopt the system. So, but we're still seeing some promising, in terms of adoption rates, some promising evidence that the policy uptake is going quite well. And then in terms of what teachers are saying, I'm not a qualitative researcher, so I literally pulled this from the TIA website. We are seeing, some positive coverage both in popular media outlets, certainly what's being displayed on the TIA website about teachers commenting about, being able to stay a teacher, be rewarded for doing things like having a long commute. One example of how, I'm being financially compensated for what I do and how much effort I put into the classroom. So in general, there is, at least in the rhetoric space, a lot of positive conversation around the TIA as a form of paying teachers more money. So for the purpose of this study, I did want to kind of focus on the initial cohorts of TIA because of the requirement that TIA requires districts to have a value-added component. Most of and I think all of the first cohorts of TIA were teachers who were teaching in STAR subject areas. And so for those outside of Texas, STAR are those subjects who are subjects where in grades 3 through 8, students are required to be tested in math and reading. I believe science is 4th and 8th, and social studies is 5th, and then there's end of course exams in secondary grades. Those were the initial subject areas where those teachers were eligible for TIA because SAS EVOS is the company that administers STAR and has that monopoly on the state. So they can do cool things like, map a district's scores or compare a teacher student's growth scores to statewide trends, both thinking about, what we might see in change in difficulty for particular assessments. And so this first cohort I'll be talking about are these teachers in just the STAR subject areas, but I did want to kind of acknowledge that TIA is not meant to just be an academic only policy, although I would argue it certainly is striving to improve academic achievement across the state. There are, in this district recently, they have adopted new cohorts of teachers from these non-STAR tested subject areas. And so this is allowing teachers in other subjects to be TIA eligible, and that includes teachers who are in APIB subjects or career and technical education, special education, physical education, among others. Now, there's whole other conversations to be had about, the extent to which we can reliably calculate value-added measures for these different subject areas. And then just more broadly, kind of getting at this issue of fairness, certainly laudable efforts to make sure that all teachers from all subjects and all backgrounds have that eligibility for TIA, because otherwise it would just be money only on the table for certain groups of teachers. And we can imagine how that might create some tension, among your peers. So today I am going to focus squarely on the topic of teacher retention and just focus on the first cohort of TIA teachers in a small urban school district. And in general, I'm curious, what are the background characteristics of these TIA designated teachers? Can we pick up on any general trends? We would hope not, right? Part of it is we want TIA to generally be distributed equally, not based on pre-existing characteristics of teachers based on demographics and things like that. But then we get to the central question, research question 2, of asking about how does teacher turnover vary among TIA designated and non-TIA designated teachers? And then getting more at some of the mechanisms, does this association differ based on teacher or school characteristics? Asking about, are you less likely to turn over because you're TIA designated if you're a middle school teacher compared to an elementary school teacher, or a math teacher compared to a reading teacher, and things like that. So the data and methods, we are relying on administrative data provided to us from a small urban school district. We have a lot of historical trend data, which is really important for mapping out trends in teacher turnover for a district. Overall, we're looking at data that comes from over a decade, so 2012 to 2023. Like I said, I'm focused on teachers and students in grades 3 through 8 assessed in math and reading in cohort A. So I'm not focused on those high school teachers just yet. I would like to have more data because I don't, unlike SAS EVOS, have lots of statewide data in the end of course exams to compare this to. I just have longitudinal data in grades 3 through 8. And just to be clear, because TIA, sometimes I feel like I need to write out a timeline of, when's your data capture year, when are you eligible, when's the payout, and things like that. This would be referring to teachers in their teaching. So they are being evaluated for their teaching in the 2018-2019 school year, right? So that is this first cohort, what they did in 2018-2019, the growth, and in general, the points that they are being factored into the TIA eligibility for based on what they taught and their student growth that year. So 2018-2019, meaning that they were paid out in the 2019-2020 year. And then they have since been paid out in 2020-2021, 2021-22, 22-23, and they will be up for redesignation after that. Small urban is, I think I used the census definition. So this is it's technically an urban area, but I believe it's less than like 250,000 people in the urban area. But in general, it's not like, I'm not looking at Houston. You'll see that by the sample size, but it is still an urban school district. The data that I'm using relies on the district's reported information on their teachers and students, including their demographics and achievement. The final sample that I'll be looking at over the decade of time is just over 10,000 teacher by year observations. And then for TIA designation, I didn't finish this slide. I can tell you what the rest of it is. But the designated categories, you can be recognized, you can be exemplary, you can be master. In general, what I'll show you today in terms of the results, I'm combining all these as just, are you TIA designated or not? I do that for a couple of reasons. One, that's a lot of the rhetoric behind TIA is like, are you a TIA teacher? For those of you familiar with House Bill 4545, part of how you can fulfill that, or get away, or I guess I should say, sidestep the tutoring requirement for students is you can give them a TIA teacher the next year. So that big group is in general in policy and in rhetoric to me treated as homogeneous. But I also look at differences by recognized, exemplary, and master. And part of what I was going to finish here on this slide is typically what we're aiming for here is that your master teacher is in your top 5% of teachers. Your exemplary teacher is the next 10 to 15%, and your recognized after that is your next 10 to 15% after that. So roughly about 30%, 33% of teachers fall in one of these three categories, with the rest of the 2/3 not being TIA designated. In terms of our descriptive statistics of what the sample looks like here, overall, we're not seeing huge differences by designation status. So over here on the far left, you see your exemplary followed by master and then followed by recognized teachers. And then you have other teachers that are in my sample who are not designated, but they're eligible. And then the reason you see those observations are higher than the original sample size is because I'm also just kind of showing you how these teachers differ from the rest of the overall teaching population in the district. But in general, we see generally it's consistent. I would say you tend to have fewer teachers who are TIA designated in this district who are Latinx. You also tend to have fewer teachers who are designated in this district if they have a higher percentage of students in their classroom who qualify for free and reduced price lunch. And then also one of the things we'll get to later is that you tend to also have fewer students who qualify for an IEP or an individualized education program for disability services. But generally, we're seeing fair amount of consistency based on the students of these teachers, based on their designation status and the teachers themselves. But I will say this gets really interesting, I think, in terms of the implications. The biggest difference by far is we found that teachers with more years of experience are much more likely to be designated. So I think that has implications for thinking about, what group of teachers are we trying to retain in the profession in terms of, where we invest our resources and policy. And I'll get into the specific band of teachers based on years of experience that appear to be more likely to stay or not based on whether they were TIA designated. So getting to some of the key variables, the outcomes I'm looking at are TIA designation status, which is a linear probability model for research question 1. Research question 2, getting at turnover, asking, does the teacher return the following school year? I look at this both in terms of, do they turn over and change schools within the same district, but also attrition. Do they leave the district entirely? And then research question 3, asking about turnover, differences by teacher and school characteristics. In the models, as I'll discuss in just a second, I am including covariates that vary at the student, classroom, and school level, including the demographics, their attendance, and their discipline rates. I also am including kind of lagged measures of student achievement and school level achievement based on the value-added literature suggesting these are really important covariates to include in your models, looking at just general teacher effects. And then I decided not to bore everyone, although I'm kind of regretting it. I love talking through some of the regression models, but I decided not to bore everyone with our empirical notation. But the summary of the analytic approaches, I start out with just a baseline model looking at with an OLS regression with student and teacher covariates, supplemented with school, grade, and year fixed effects. And then I also include in that, like I mentioned before, school trends in achievement. And then I'm using a difference in difference estimator. Basically, what you need to know about this is I'm creating this kind of treatment group as those teachers that are in these STAR tested subject areas, with the control group being teachers from other academic subjects in the same grades that aren't eligible for TIA. So for example, this might be a social studies teacher where STAR is not administered in the social studies year, or a science teacher not administered in the science year. And then I also, in some of these other grades, what's interesting in future analyses is I compare this to other academic teachers in elementary, for example, social studies second grade, and their achievement comes not from STAR necessarily, but from iStation, other standardized measures of value-added effectiveness for teachers. And that's where we get into the treatment effect, being that it turns on in the year where TIA has been adopted and you're eligible for that payout and designation, and then it stays on for the years following the policy. So that's the general kind of diff and diff spiel that we're going to be using as part of this. There is a lot of, I think, if you're a methods nerd like me, a lot of discussion in a pretty booming literature these days around, difference and differences. Is it as robust as we think it is? I'm not necessarily going to make any causal claims, particularly in this study. So, but I do like to throw up a good slide showing you that I did due diligence in test of robustness. One of the things you can do is you can kind of create this a placebo year or a placebo treatment. I just altered the year that the teacher was, TIA designated and found no results there. So that was reassuring. Also limited to see if there are certain pieces of the sample that may be driving the results and we're not really picking up on main effects for teachers overall. It may just be driven by certain concentrations. So I limited and split the sample into elementary and middle school subsamples, as well as a few other ones not listed there, and didn't find differences that appeared to be concerning. And then there's also this concern that, okay, are teachers who were more likely to be TIA designated assigned different types of students based on the student's prior achievement? And I didn't find evidence in this district that these TIA teachers in their data capture year specifically were assigned students with differences in prior achievement on average. So in general, I think, the approach is fairly robust. Again, we are limited to just this one district, and I'm not going to purport that what I'm showing you is causal per se, but I do think it's a pretty strong association and predictive evidence of what we might expect for TIA statewide. Okay, so now on to our results. A summary of research question 1, likelihood of TIA designation. I think it's generally reassuring that once you, in your linear probability model, which means that we're kind of accounting for between school differences, accounting for students' background characteristics, teachers' background characteristics, years of experience, more than just a descriptive statistics table, there's only two demographic characteristics that corresponded to a likelihood of TIA designation. And first, it's teachers with students with disabilities or an individualized education program were less likely to be TIA designated, which I think is a really interesting piece of the district's future policies in TIA, because they have made pull out classrooms like purely just special education teachers eligible for TIA in future years. Not in response to this directly, but in general, it is a little concerning that if you have a higher proportion of students with IEPs in your classroom, you're less likely to be designated, because our value-added models should be accounting for that if they're robust. And then teachers with more years of experience are more likely to be TIA designated. And this is to be expected, in my opinion. And what I thought was really interesting is this is generally a linear relationship. So every year of additional years of experience you have, you're more likely to receive TIA designation. And this is also consistent between the different levels of TIA designation status, with your master teachers having much higher years of experience on average than your recognized and exemplary teachers, for example. But it does taper out at about year 9, which is consistent with the literature, interesting enough, on teacher effects. Okay, and then now to research question 2, looking at the effects of TIA on retention. Sorry, my graph is not perfectly APA formatted. This is kind of fresh off the press, so to speak. But in general, found that TIA designation status corresponded with an 8 percentage point decline in the likelihood of turnover after being TIA designated in the 2018-19 school year, which means that your likelihood of turnover in 2019-20 was 8 percentage points less on average, which is about, for the district, a pretty sizable effect. It's like a 30% decline overall in turnover if for the TIA designated teachers compared to very similar teachers otherwise. What I would like to do after this is look at next future designations of TIA. So more and more teachers have been designated both in STAR tested subject areas and not STAR tested subject areas. So I'd like to compare this to future years, but just for this initial cohort in the years following, overall on average an 8 percentage point decline in turnover for the TIA designated teachers. And this is almost exactly comparable to attrition. So I'd mentioned that I looked at turnover, which is defined as just, did I stay in my school? And that includes move to a different school in the district, compared to just overall attrition. I left the district entirely. And then research question 3, which I think this is where a lot of the implications and discussion for next steps lie. I did find some differences based on teacher and school characteristics. So what this question is asking is, okay, we found that TIA designation is corresponding to lower turnover, right? You're more likely to stay. But which teachers appear to be driven by this TIA designation status? Like, which ones are disproportionately affected by it? And teachers in this 3 to 5 years of experience band are the most likely by far, and our middle school teachers. Those two subgroups are the most likely to be affected in terms of their likelihood of turnover in TIA, which I think is like super, super interesting. And I've tested that band a little bit, gone to teachers with 2 years of experience, 6 years of experience. It does change pretty significantly. There's something about that 3 to 5 years of experience area where those teachers appear to be much more likely to stay if they are TIA designated. Also good news in terms of, demographic congruence and representation. The teachers in this district who are Latinx were more likely to stay if they were TIA designated compared to their other counterparts. Teachers in schools with less students eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So this isn't so great news. Those teachers appeared to be disproportionately likely to stay because of TIA. I mean, we want all teachers to stay. That's not what I'm saying, but we also want TIA to be a policy that is driving better retention among demographic groups that are less likely to stay anyway. And then our middle school teachers. So like I said before, that teachers in the 3 to 5 years of experience and our middle school teachers much more likely to stay if they were TIA designated. And so if you think about that 8 percentage point number I was bringing up earlier, that grows to about 12 percentage points for our middle school teachers. So quite a sizable difference in terms of the effects of TIA and retention for those groups. Looking at the chat just a little bit, don't want to get ahead of myself. So Garrett asked, tenure influencing 3 to 5 year time experience at turnover. Yeah, Garrett, I think that's exactly right. I think there's like a lot that happens, right? Like your first, like I wasn't super surprised to find that TIA wasn't moving the needle that much on teachers with like 0 or 1 year of experience, right? Because like the reason you might stay a teacher is very different compared to teachers with more years of experience, but like not a ton, right? So not these career teachers who've been teaching for 20 years. But teachers in that 3 to 5 year span where you are getting into issues of tenure, getting into issues of getting longer term credentials. So our teachers with like these one or I guess you can extend the 1 year permanent, an additional year, like once you get full certification. I think those are the teachers where we're starting to see these effects, but still not like longer term teachers in the district. Yeah, so I would love to have some of this discussion, and I know we have some fantastic audience members who can probably say a lot smarter things about this than I can. But yes, Pablo, the teachers can take designation with them if they leave the school, which is why like this is like such a crucial question, right? Like looking at retention, because if your designation status follows you, then is it that teachers are earning the designation and then leaving and going to a different district or going to a different school? Again, there's also, right, I mentioned before, districts are entirely in charge of their compensation plans in terms of how they spend that 90% of the allotment. So let's say you're in this district and, and in the case of this district, the district is paying 90% of the allotment to the teacher, but then you go to Dallas ISD and that is certainly not the case. You may get a bump in your base pay because Dallas is more expensive than where this district is, but that bonus pay very much shrinks in terms of the amount of money you could be making. So yes, you can take the designation with you. It just, the money is a different question. So, oh, and then Nick, sorry, I skipped your question. Would love to hear more about the advantages of using a linear probability model as opposed to logistic regression. My thought on this is always like to compare both. But like in general, I think linear probability models like are easier to interpret. Like, and I care a lot about, my work being easier to interpret in terms of policy and broader audiences, and logistics and getting into odds ratios, unless you're talking to like a table of poker players, like no one talks a whole lot in odds. So I like the linear probability model for that reason. So some takeaways. There are a few sorting issues that I think will still have to be fleshed out. I think this is why it's important to look at future years of TIA designations with more data. TIA is very, very new. So it would be important to look at just like, okay, are students from these more advantaged backgrounds consistently getting more likely to have these TIA teachers? Again, once you control for a host of different characteristics, we're not finding that it's like super predictive of having a TIA teacher, except for the individualized education plan students and students with in schools with lower students qualifying for free and reduced price lunch. But just even at a descriptive level, like we want TIA to be a far-reaching policy, and that includes particularly supporting student groups that have been historically disenfranchised. And then in terms of the main findings for retention, right? So I think we're showing promising evidence that TIA designation is one factor that improves teacher retention for what I would argue are really important groups of teachers. So these teachers in that mid-year of experience, so teachers who have already passed the threshold of like, they're now effective. They've been doing this for a few years now. They're not kind of like getting in the trenches from day one, right? I mean, I think that's another group of teachers that it's really important to support too. But just in terms of that group of teachers, I like that this is helping those teachers stay in the profession, because we want those teachers who are already effective, but certainly are still exiting the profession at a high rate to stay. And for this district specifically, our Latinx teachers and our middle school teachers also tend to exhibit higher turnover broadly. So I think that's another set of important groups that TIA appears to be improving retention rates for. But overall, I did want to stress that even though there are some groups that are disproportionately benefiting from TIA in terms of retention, the main relationship is still consistently observed across elementary and middle school grade levels. So that is good, reassuring evidence. And then some of these are like good discussion questions, and I'm almost done. So I'm gonna wrap up real quick, and then we can get to a lot of your fantastic questions in the chat. So thinking ahead in terms of policy recommendations, I want to stress that we need to continue examining TIA effectiveness and retention in the years following the initial cohort. That include even my own group as new data comes out. And we have to examine potential mechanisms. So in general, all of you have heard me, if I've either talked your ear off about TIA or I've talked your ear off about the ERC or both, right? One of the things that I think is a bit disconcerting is that like TIA status, like designation level, is not available in the statewide data that a lot of us researchers use. So we have to continue to lean into our partnerships on the ground with local school districts who are willing to supply the TIA data and look at the effectiveness both on teacher retention, but then as I'll get to in a second, a reinvigorated focus on school improvement as well. Is this helping students in the district? And so I know one of our next steps with this partnering school district is to tie their teacher data and their TIA data, which a lot of that data is just kept locally, to the ERC so that we can actually trace teachers where they go throughout the state, look at exactly that question. Are you taking that designation status with you? And what happens if you go to a district that has a very different compensation plan? Those are like such really important mechanistic questions that can get to the viability of TIA as a policy and really, I think, help patch it up in a few really important areas for future legislative sessions. And then I also want to stress that I think retention is certainly an important part of TIA, but it cannot be the only part of TIA. And I'll tell this quick story. I was at brunch with a friend who is a TIA teacher, and long story short, has no idea why she was designated. You know, in general, had a great growth year, clearly, that first year of designation, and is making a pretty penny in terms of the bonus pay, but has not reached even, so she is a master teacher, the highest level, and has not even reached the recognized level if she were to be resubmitted for designation since that year. And that teacher is already, I can just tell you, she's like, I got a new car. I paid off my credit cards. I've adopted a different lifestyle than I had initially as a teacher. And so I am actively looking for new jobs because my designation status is up this next year. So like, I want to stress that like, yes, TIA and paying teachers more is good, but it cannot be entirely focused on six-figure salaries and paying teachers more. Like it's really sad just in general, a commentary on the profession. If that is like what we are leaning into in terms of the pathos of a policy, it also has to be about like conversations about like, I've never seen my students grow more since TIA was adopted in my district. I've never seen our school be so collaborative and focused on student growth and improving outcomes for everyone in the district until TIA. I have heard anecdotes like that. And that is what I would argue has to be a lot more of the conversation going forward. And again, I know I didn't show you any research tied to that. My team is focused on a separate study looking at student achievement and school improvement outcomes. But I did want to kind of put in a spoiler that is coming from us. And I do think that is a really important part of the conversation going forward, because one of the things that if I had a giant limitation bullet point I would put here is what we have failed to see as a state is what happens when the designation status stops, right? You've had your 5 years of bonus pay and you don't get redesignated in the 1 year you have to get redesignated to keep that bonus pay for the next 5 years. We've yet to see what happens in terms of retention, and my fear is that we might not see so positive effects that we are seeing here, at least in this anecdotal piece of the study. So there's my contact info, but we have lots of time for discussion and questions. So I encourage you to come off mute, ask some questions, or also ask questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to read them aloud. Okay, so until we get other questions, did you look at heterogeneity by teacher VAM, efficacy, observation scores? No, great question. That is part of what we're looking in terms of the subgroup analysis for our kind of student achievement level. We're interested in like, which of these factors that go into TIA are more predictive of student growth and student achievement in future years. So I don't have anything to tell you yet, Amanda, but that's a great question. So districts might compete with each other and make sure their policies are attracting the designated teachers. I wonder how that might impact their turnover rate. I so agree with you, Fanny, and that is what I think. That's why I wish we had better data statewide on TIA being given to researchers like myself doing the statewide research, because then it could be really interesting to then like flag compensation plans for districts and look at turnover rates. And I think that is part of the potential either intended, if you're a policy skeptic, or unintended consequence of TIA is districts poaching teachers from other districts. Because you can look up who's TIA designated. You write like first name, last name, see what their designation is on the TIA website. That's all there. Yeah. Oh, so that's exactly to Carolyn's point that she made in the chat, which is creating this market force where districts are competing for the best teachers among themselves. I don't have a sense of how much that is happening. I will say anecdotally what I've heard from the district I just showed you results for. There is a lot of just misunderstanding of what goes into TIA designation in the first place, let alone then how the policy varies from district to district. So we have heard anecdotally that teachers have left this district and they were TIA designated, and then they went to another district that either didn't have TIA adopted, so they didn't have a local designation plan, and so they weren't receiving anything there, but then, or they went to a district and the compensation plan differed dramatically. And they didn't know that as part of the interview process, you should ask, I'm a TIA teacher. What is your plan? Like, how do you spend my money? Do you give it all to me? Like, that's what I was making back at this district. And so we've seen some frustration there. And then I believe also we've seen some teachers come back after realizing that. So it's interesting to see how that lack of information manifests. How is TIA funded? It is funded via House Bill 3. So it's funded by the state. I would say part of, Pablo, your point is it is money that the district otherwise would just not have. So it is like if you are a TIA district, right, that allotment is just new money going into you. But of course, you have to like spend money to like adopt the system. So you can use 10% of that allotment for things like paying Jacob to calculate a VAM for you in a non-STAR tested subject area. You can use that 10% to pay a new district administrator to kind of design the whole TIA system for your district. But that 90% still has to be spent on teacher salary somewhere. So that's where I think you get into like some of the skepticism around adopting TIA for some of our rural districts. Do I think a vested system could improve TIA? Great question. It's all up to the district in terms of how they pay the teacher, but I know there are some districts that have like new step schedules for TIA teachers, and that is like kind of a little bit of a vested program where you get a little bit of that bonus this year, but you get more of the bonus the next year and more of the bonus the next year. So like there are models of that, and that's why again I will stress comparing district adoptions of TIA is super, super important, because then I think you get into like which compensation plan is working, right? Is the lump sum payment enough? Like, is it just the money? Or is it like, no, you actually kind of are getting buy-in from teachers because you're not giving them all that money up front? Or like, is it that like you are spending money on other teachers, school-wide? So like maybe my whole team, my whole, fifth grade team gets part of that bonus pay, and I get maybe slightly more of it, but like in general, the morale is still collaborative because we're all wanting to get TIA designated and we want our peers to be TIA designated. So there's different kind of models that I think could improve TIA beyond just the lump sum. So promoting teacher salary, getting people to talk about their teaching profession in a way might get people to reconsider teaching because some people don't consider it because of money. I agree with that. So I was asked on a panel earlier in January, February, which policy I was most excited about. And I said TIA. I think as a researcher, it excites me because I think there's both intended and unintended consequences that I'm really interested in investigating. But also, like, I will say, to TIA's credit, right? Even if it's not exactly working how we want it to perfectly, it is a complete revamp of how we're thinking about the teaching profession and compensation. And that is like a very important part because, like, especially since the pandemic, like teaching is not the same. Like and really it's been a broken, like our approach to like improving the teaching profession has like really not been great for like a decade or more at this point. So I get really excited about like just acknowledgments and like efforts to dramatically revamp a system that has been broken. And so in that way, I do agree with kind of Fanny what you're talking about, that getting people to reconsider teaching, like myself, like I didn't become a teacher 100% because of the pay. Like I hate to say that, but that is like, I love teaching. I was one course away from getting my credential, decided last minute I was just going to go to grad school because it was not worth it. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so Carolyn, you got Lane to answer your question in the chat. So that's great. Yeah, other questions from folks? I'm curious if you have thoughts on the future of TIA, not necessarily about my study, although if you do have thoughts there, I'd love to hear those too.
Jacob, this is Tara. Let me turn on my camera real quick.
Yeah.
So I asked a question about, you'd mentioned having lunch with your friends. So what about that she was looking elsewhere, she wasn't sure if she could get redesignated. So what about the process would make it difficult for a teacher to be redesignated? So is it the process? I'm not trying to call out your friend or ask you, it's a question about like, would that be a typical issue for teachers or a concern for them? And what about the system could be improved, or what sort of hypotheses might you have about what could be driving that?
Great question. And sorry, I skipped that question in the chat clearly. So such an important question. I would say that for a lot of people, TIA is a black box in terms of like where that designation score comes from, right? So like depending on on the district system and how it's designed, right? You get like in this district, I'll just say you get a score, and the score is like out of like 1,000 or 1,500 or something like that. And like certain parts of that, and all of this depends, by the way, on which category of teachers you're in. So STAR teachers have their own formula. CTE teachers have their own formula. The district kind of changes this or can change it for everybody. But part of it is like there's different weights to the components that go into it. Like by law, the only thing that has to go into your designation is your VAM, your value added measure, and t-test, right? Other than that, there's like, you can do student surveys, you can do, you can weight the VAM and t-test differently, however you want. You can do like teacher attendance. You can do professional development requirements. Like you can have all these different things factor into the score. But what I would say is that for a lot of people, they don't know, okay, like I would just say the most common question is like, how do I get here? How do I get recognized? Or if I'm already recognized, how do I get to exemplary? Or how do I get to master? And that is like a really hard question to answer, because the value, we can't tell you your value add until you've already finished the year, right? So, and then part of that is because just the nature of TIA, you can't designate all your teachers, or like you shouldn't. You're likely to get your system reneged, right? And so some of it is that you're being compared to other teachers, and so we can't just kind of predict how you're going to do compared to your peers because the teaching hasn't happened yet. But I would also say, just like my biggest gripe is that it is really hard to communicate and explain in how that translates into practice. This is the score you need to get, Because as a quantitative person, I would love to be able to tell a teacher that, but I can't. I can't tell them the number. I can't tell them the average of growth they need. I can't tell them the number of students they need to move from, approaching to meets. I can't tell any of that until after the fact. But what I do think can be improved, because I think this is at the heart of your question, is we do have better statistical tools to give teachers information that can be used in practice. So like, for example, in the SAS EVOS reports that they get for districts that pay for their VAM and pay for different services, they will give retroactive graphs, right, of this is where your student was at the beginning of the year, and this is where they were predicted to be at the end of the year, and this is where they actually were, right? And so that difference between what you were predicted to be at and what you actually were at as a student, that is the value add, right, that is being prescribed to the teacher. I can do that for teachers now, right? In the fall, based on your students' previous achievement and their current characteristics and just your school's characteristics and all those things, I can give you what your students are predicted to be at. And then what I think that can be really helpful for teachers is you can target, okay, Jacob is not expected to grow very much this year, but like I see a lot of potential in Jacob. Like he seems really interested. Like I think I can get him well past what he's predicted to do. And so kind of in a world of scarce resources and time, right? That is like a really useful data tool that I think can be used to improve both the trust in the value add system, but also improve just like confidence around data, what it's being used for, and that you're not just all your data is not just being thrown in this like box, like juggled up a little bit and then spit out random designations. And that's what I think is, in the case of my friend, is the perception, is that she doesn't really know, nothing she's done as a teacher has changed. She's been a teacher for, 7-8 years. So like, I don't know, what do I do? I haven't changed my practice at all, but I'm not hitting this benchmark. So there's a little bit of a vague, but hopefully somewhat helpful answer.
Do you mind if I give our perspective, Jacob?
Yeah, go for it.
So in Tara, in our case, we have a website, we do quarterly training, we do a big BOI rollout, we have a teacher playbook, we have a district playbook that lists all of the eligible categories, how you figure out what category you're in, what happens when you move campuses, here's the weighting for each category, all of the things, right? And I get, at least a dozen phone calls every week asking a question about this, that, or the other, because of the kind of legwork that's required to prop the system up and keep it running. And I get very similar questions from campus administrators too. What I can say is I've also been out to about a dozen campuses this year to talk to various PLC teams and instructional leaders about what student growth is, and how to utilize instructional practices to make growth stronger for whatever teacher group they're having me come talk to. So those are very encouraging conversations. I might say, based on one of the questions I also saw up there about teacher evaluation, I think maybe that was from Fanny. Part of TIA that Jacob mentioned is also system validation that Heather and company kind of manages for TEA. And so it evaluates district systems on designations according to student growth and then designations according to t-tests. And those things should match up, right? High growth correlates to high t-tests and low growth correlates to low t-tests. But what we saw, right, is when we put a benchmark for t-tests, and now everybody knows what the cut point for t-tests is. Well, what happens to our district average for t-test appraisal? Right, it goes up. And so that's difficult for me and district leaders to manage because our system has to be calibrated so we can get approval from TEA to continue designating teachers. And so, we have to deal with t-test inflation.
Yeah, Shruti.
So I had a question about TEA. Um, so when we went to Austin for the Tribune conference, I attended this one session, and there were a lot of teachers from Houston ISD, and they were not happy. They basically were saying that they hate TEA, and one teacher also said that they don't like that the money is tied to student outcome, and they were also saying that instead of giving money to TEA, they should give it to the school district. Um, and they're also not happy about the fact that there's a risk of district losing control. And I couldn't understand why. I mean, to me, I feel their income should be tied to how student outcome shows up. So I couldn't understand why that point was brought up. And if you could
So
talk about that.
some background, right? Houston ISD has had a state takeover. So they've had their school board gutted, like new, what are they called? I forget, but like new board members put in, a new superintendent installed. So like there's in general a lot of distrust for TA around that. And so I think that's a majority, if I had to guess, of the sentiment that you're picking up on. But then also, I mean, yeah, I think there's in general gonna be distrust for like, and that's why I really think as someone who cares deeply about mitigating unintended consequences and cares deeply about like longevity of policy, that is why I stress that the conversation has to be more than just about money. Because like, I just think in general, if you are focusing everything in rhetoric on money, that like, you're not focused on the things behind money, which is like people and students and schools. And so I think part of it is like, you know, if the teacher, and this gets a little bit at Jeremy's point earlier, like if the teacher down the hall from you is making like a $30,000 bonus more than you are, they teach the exact same thing. Maybe you think they're just as effective as you are. Maybe you think that they're not as effective as you are, and you're like, they're not as good of a teacher, right? Like if there's nothing more to the discussion around other than just money, and you don't know how that money was allocated, then yeah, you're going to get a lot of distrust in the system. It's going to backfire. People are going to leave. And I think that's exactly what you're hearing in anecdotally from that conversation you just brought up.
That makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, you all have my email, firstname.lastname@ttu.edu. I would love any sort of follow-up. I talk people's ear off about this stuff. I think it's super interesting. It's super important from all methodologies, qualitative, mixed methods, quantitative. I do think we need more. We need to know a lot more. This policy is not going away anytime soon. So I encourage you all to kind of do your own research and dig into it a little bit more. But it's been lovely to share the lunch hour with you. This recording will be posted on YouTube and our website. And I hope you can catch us next week for the next expanded brown bag session. It's good to see all of you.